Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at the Welland Museum and to the Niagara Genealogical Society for co-hosting this event with us. I'm Lisa. I'm the Executive Director of the Welland Museum, and I'm going to begin with a land acknowledgement. The Welland Museum, being part of the Niagara region, is situated on treaty land. These lands are steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. Intended to guide the relationship between the First Nations and Europeans, the two-row wampum is an important symbol of everlasting equality, peace, and friendship. It remains the foundation upon which Canada was built, and we recognize that this is mutually respectful relationship between nations is essential for reconciliation today. There are many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The Welland Museum stands with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of lands on which we live. We recognize that we must do more to learn about the history and current situation of Indigenous people. This will help us better understand our roles and take responsibility towards reconciliation as treaty people, residents, and caretakers. And I'm going to pass it over to Dianna, who is our presenter today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dianna Fulton. I'm going to say right now, I'm not an expert in home children. I'm a descendant, and my goal is to tell the story of my grandfather and home children to get more recognition to what happened with the children. And today happens to be National Home Child Day in Canada. So September 28th every year is not celebrated like most holidays, but for the people that are descendants, 28th of September is a big day for us. Tonight, the bridge right here on Main Street will be lit in red, white, and blue, and that is because of the home children colors, as well as Niagara Falls. And there are quite a few other lightings across the province, actually across the country, and in Australia and England as well. So there's a whole slew of places lit up. So let's get started on home children. So children from the UK from under the age of 18. So it started as young as 4, went as high as 18. Nobody came over after 18. Were admitted and trained in the juvenile immigration agencies through programs supported by Canada and the UK government. They settled Canada between 1869 and 1939, and only about 2 to 5% were orphans. The rest of them either had one or both parents still alive, and often they all had siblings. Many were from institutions or workhouses, but sometimes they just pulled them off the street because their choice was go into a home child and come to Canada or one of the other Commonwealth countries, or go to jail. That was sometimes their choice. Many home children remained quiet, and it was abandoned during the First World War, and then it finished at the end, just before the Second World War. By 1924, children under the age of 14 were discouraged, and some were also, up until the 1970s, still sent to Australia. So this is my connection. So this gentleman right here in this picture is my grandfather. He was sent over at 7. I was able to do something for my mom and her 11 siblings. They've never seen a childhood picture of their dad. And I was able, during my research, to be able to give them a picture of their father. There's an estimate of 12%, or over 4 million of the Canadian population, that is a descendant of a home child, and many of them don't know it because a lot of the home children did not tell their stories. Like I said, my grandfather, or Papa as we would call him, he had his children. None of them knew that he was a home child until after he died. He has 22 grandchildren, 38 great-grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. And all of them know little about him because none of them were interested in it like I am. And now they know more because we were able to do this. The other young man in the photo with him is his older brother, who was sent to Canada 6 months after he was because his older brother was sick. We were lucky enough that his older brother was determined to find his younger brother, knowing that he was here. And we have records of his brother writing letters back to the Bernardos who sent them over here, trying to find my grandfather, which he did because my grandfather ended up adopting his 2 younger children when his wife died. Okay, so we're going to set the scene here. Transitioning from power machinery to from hand tools to basic machinery, changed the dynamics of the factories. They didn't need people as much anymore. Less work, more poverty. The poor and the working class, they worked in the factories, wages were low, poor working conditions, little to no job security. Children were part of the labor force, working long hours, high risk jobs. Like the children were sent in to clean the machinery. So those were the higher risk jobs. In the early 1860s, an estimate 1/5 of the British textile workers were under the age of 15. They couldn't keep up with the number of workers arriving in the rural areas because there was nothing out for people to do, which led to overcrowding in housing, polluted and unsanitary living conditions, disease. Families lost traditional support systems, and if one parent died, became ill, or abandoned the family, the other parent was left looking after all the children, and the children were starving and running in the street. Often established by local parishioners to care for the poor, you had the workhouses. The British Poor Law had an Amendment Act in 1834 to support these workhouses. The smaller workhouses were closed and they opened bigger ones. It was supported by taxes. It was called the Board of Guardians that did all the laws and looked over the workhouses. So imagine, if you will, you're on the board of a ship with hundreds of children who have been confronted by sights, sounds, and smells that they've never experienced before. You're between the ages of 4 and 18. You're getting on this ship with hundreds of other children. A lot of times there was a chaperone, but the chaperone would usually assign the older children to help look after the younger children. Seasickness was a common factor. Entertainment was provided by crew members. The passage from England over here lasted anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks. I can't even imagine what they went through. So the boat that you see in the picture is the boat my grandfather was on. It was the Sicilian. And he arrived here in 1910 in Quebec, and his destination was Toronto. And then, of course, Niagara eventually. Sleeping quarters were subpar. You can find the passenger list on Library and Archives Canada and the name of the children that were on the passenger list. So if, like with my grandfather, I can find all the children that he was on the ship with his passenger list. Sometimes it's just the children's name and their age and what agency they sent them to. Where my grandfather, it was his name, his age, where he came from, where he was going, and all, like I said, all the children that were with him as well. Up here on the desk is a trunk. This is a trunk that the children would bring with them. This one here belonged to E.J. Foster. It came in June of 1901. We are looking for the Foster family because I would love to reunite the Foster family with the trunk. I'm a guardian, and my belief is to give back things that belong to the proper family, the proper owners. So in this trunk, this is what a boy would have. Up there on the screen, it's not a lot of stuff, and that's all they would bring with them, and that's all they would have of theirs, and maybe one personal item if they had one. And the trunks were no bigger for the ladies. This is what the girls would bring. This is the trunk here. So it arrived on June 20th, 1901 with the Church of England, and he was taken to Niagara on the Lake. His trunk was displayed in Wainfleet, and of course I have to give the credits to the photo to Lori. Lori and I are very good friends. Lori's mom was a home child, and she died at 98 years old. So after arriving by ship, the children were sent to distributing homes and then sent on to farms in the area, families requiring domestic servants, and some families who wished to adopt the children and raise them as their own. Although some of the children were poorly treated and were abused, many experienced a better life than if they had remained in the slums of England. Many served with the Canadian and British forces in both world wars. So some of them who really wanted to go home when the wars came on, they applied to be in the British forces and were sent back to England, and that's how a lot of them got back home if they wanted to go back. A lot of them arrived at Pier 21 in out east, and Pier 21 has a wonderful display of a marker and a display for home children rated Pier 21, which I've not yet been to, but that is one of my goals and dreams to the first organizing agencies. The first one was Maria Rye, which was in Niagara on the Lake. In 1869, they sent a group from the workhouse and other children to Ontario. They opened what they called Our Western Home in Niagara-on-the-Lake. The second agency was Annie McPhee's in 1870. They opened a home of industry in London, fed and housed and educated and trained children, opened Marchmont in Belleville in 1870, and also opened one in Cambridge and one in Quebec. There were over 50 sending agencies responsible for sending children to Canada, including Fegans, Quarries, Bernardo's, which is what my grandfather was, and is usually the most popular one people hear, Middlemore, Catholic Immigration Society, Salvation Army, and the Church of England Ways and Strays. Many factors came into play when determining a child's placement. Some organizations were not structured at all and gave children out to whoever wanted them. Typically, the placements were determined by the child's age and how much work they could do. A 5-year-old would not be expected to do some work that a 14-year-old was. Fees charged for the children by the organization was based on the amount of work the child could do. A farmer would be one to decide how much they were willing to pay for a child and what level of work they were expecting. The factor that the child might have a younger or older sibling did not matter when it determined placements, unless the family wanted more than one child and it fit both the age restrictions for their siblings. Typically, younger children were boarded out with a fee paid to the farmer. When they were old enough to work, the farmer would then expect to pay the child instead of receiving money. So a lot of times they would take the children in just to get the money. And then when they were too old to, and they had to start paying the fees, they would send the children back to the receiving home saying they weren't good enough or whatever. Farmers had to pay for the children's work. Indentured contracts were introduced to ensure that children were paid. This money was typically held in trust for the children and released once they turned 21 years of age. Not all children received their pay. There was no payment if they died before the age of 21. Many children did, including many who died in the wars. And if they were unaware that they were to be paid, they didn't get their pay as well. There were penalties put against children's wages. Typically, if they left the work situation early, a certain amount would be deducted from their earnings. Also deducted was the cost of clothing, haircuts, life insurance premiums. The children were strongly encouraged to carry life insurance as some of the examples. Dr. Bernardo, and like I said, this is the company that sent my grandfather over. They brought over 33,000 children. This is where, like I said, my grandfather and his brothers were sent. They sent his sisters to Australia. My great-grandmother had 11 children. My great-grandfather passed away. Grandma couldn't care for the children because back in the early 1900s, women didn't have rights, like we all know. He only ever seen his brother ever again. He's never seen anybody else. We do have documentation that his younger brother looked for him, but never actually got to see him. And his youngest brother died in 1974, so it was 2 years after I was born. Children were placed across Canada in most of the provinces. A vast majority of the children were placed in Ontario, Central Ontario having the largest population of home children. The city which received the largest number of children was Toronto, being that it was an immigration port, of course. We get asked if there were some sent to the United States. We do not have any official records of any, but many home children as young adults migrated on their own to the United States, so there may be descendants in America as well. Sometimes in the States, you'll hear about the orphan trains, and sometimes people try to connect the two, but there is no proof right now because the Americans weren't a Commonwealth country and they sent everybody to the Commonwealth countries. Return back to the UK, like I said, some children returned to the UK by the organizations. For some reason, they couldn't place them here, so the organizations would send them back. Generally, there was no intention of returning the children to either the UK or their families. Like we said before, siblings weren't always kept together. In fact, there was little effort to keep siblings together. And some of the children did reunite with their families. Generally, it was done on their own efforts and not by the sending organizations. Often the children would arrive in these intake homes, as we called them, in poor health. They were flea bitten, had boils, sores, lice, ringworm, measles, chickenpox, fever, tuberculosis. They would have to be bathed, had their heads shaved, their clothes were burned, clean clothes were provided. If they were ill, they were hospitalized or isolated, and they were expected to attend both school and church. None of them stayed usually more than a year. And this is some of the training that they would receive when they were in the homes. And most of the boys would build those boxes, would build those cases for the children to bring their stuff. And a lot of them built their own. This is a typical day in one of the receiving homes. Although there was good intentions to keep up with the demand and have a solution, sending the children to the colonies, as they called it, children would benefit from fresh air, work on farms and in domestic jobs. Families needed the help and were happy to pay the low wages. Farmers were always happy to have the extra hands. It was increasing the population in Canada and other Commonwealth and reducing the cost of care, and the parents' view as Canada was a safe haven with lots of opportunity. Some parents thought the admission was temporary. Like I said, they put their kids in and they were unable to get them back. Sometimes they were told, oh, just come, bring them in for a bit, we'll train them, we'll help you, and then you can have them back, and they never did. Others signed consent forms and allowed their children to come. Some of them only learned that their children were sent to Canada after they were on a ship, and they were told you can have them back if you pay for the return. Library and Archives Canada has the largest amount of records other than Home Child Canada, which is an organization that just became a not-for-profit. It's the first federal not-for-profit organization for home children. I also have some records and access to records. I am the chair of the British Home Child Special Interest Group of the Ontario Genealogical Society. And we also have a Facebook group. There are lots of Facebook groups out there that will help with records. There's a database including some of the Maria, Rye, and Middlemore records. Most of them are Bernardo's and the passenger lists, of course, because Bernardo's is actually still very active in England. You can write to Bernardo's, ask if they've got the file. They'll tell you how much it's going to cost. You pay the fee, and I can tell you it's nothing less than $250 Canadian. And then when they get time, because right now the wait list is 18 months, and you can get anything from 3 sheets of paper and a picture to a stack like this. Just depends on the records they have. So this is some of the stuff that you will find at Library and Archives Canada, the passenger list, the juvenile inspection records, they're hit and miss. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. Everybody was inspected, and not always the reports were given. There is a query form. I don't know if they still have it. I haven't had a chance to think, but Library and Archives Canada is like everything else. There's only so many hours in the day and there's only so much staff. If you ever get a chance, definitely go to Ottawa, book an appointment to go to Library and Archives Canada and ask for the stuff, and I know they will give access to it or help you find what you're looking for if they have it. Come on. Census. If you're looking at a census record and you're doing your family history, and all of a sudden you see a child that doesn't have the same last name between the ages of 4 and 18, there's a good chance that it's a home child. Other sources, but don't forget about the vital stats, city directories, military files. A lot of times on the military files, they would say that they were a home child. I have been through some cemeteries looking at headstones, and it actually says British home child right on their headstone. And newspapers, voters lists. Home Child Canada, they have a registry. If you search the registry for the name, it will tell you if they have your home child registered and what information they have on them. If they don't have them registered, you can actually ask for them to be put in the registry, and they will actually put them in the registry. And then here are a few other groups that have some records and what records they have. The best way to start with your records is, like I said, jot down the information that you know, ask other family members, find birth records. It's the best place to start. You always try to look start with what you know and work your way backwards instead of trying to start like, oh, I'm looking for my great grandfather who's deceased and nobody knows about them. You go start backwards and to find the records. So this is Bernardo's. Like I said, this is a few years ago. The 25 equals out to $250, and then it goes up from there depending on how many records and stuff they have. I was lucky enough that when I got my grandfather's records, it was before they realized that it was a moneymaker, and I got my grandfather's file for free. So I told my husband that I needed him to get a hobby and to get off the computer and find out about my grandfather. Now he has an obsession. He's on the computer more, but I know a lot about my grandfather. So it worked out for both of us. Like I said, right now, the expected delivery is 2 years to 18 months. I know somebody who filed during COVID for theirs and just got theirs last month. And it was like the second year into COVID. Because you have to remember now the backlog they're trying to make up, right? And then researching online, you could always Google. There's lots of resources on Google for home children. You just type in home children and you will get a list of all kinds of resources out there. So this is some of the books I have. There's actually a new book being released today on home children. There are some display books back there. Please look at them. If you want a copy, take a picture of the ISBN number, because the ISBN number will tell you where it's available. Sometimes the libraries have them. I know Little Immigrants is the one I always tell everybody to start with if they want to know the really good true story. I've been lucky enough to meet Kenneth, the gentleman that wrote that book, and that's the book that I always tell people to go to start. It gives you lots of information, but have Kleenex because you will cry. YouTube, don't forget about checking out YouTube. There's lots of movies and films on the subject. Australia made a film called Oranges and Sunshine, because that's what the kids were offered when they went to Australia. Oranges and sunshine. And then social media. Like I said, there are all kinds of Facebook groups out there, and they're all willing to share resources, help with research, and share their experience and their knowledge. Notices appeared in many local newspapers, including Brockville and Hagersville. This is actually one of them. It basically advertised that the kids are coming to Canada. So if you want one, to apply. Other places to look are museums. Museums has got records. The Legion, I know the Legion in Brockville. This is their honor roll, and everyone with a star beside it is a home child. So memorial stones. So this one here is in Peterborough. It has over 9,000 children's names on it. It's right in front of the Hazel Bry home in Peterborough. It is beautiful. I have been there. But there are a few names from Bernardo's, but it's mostly girls. There are a few boys, but it's mostly girls because the Hazel Bray was a girls' home. In the cemetery, Park Lawn Cemetery, there are 75 children buried in 2 unmarked graves. One plot has a single stone on it. It was erected by Walter Albone in memory of his brother. It doesn't acknowledge the other children that are buried there, but no names. It does acknowledge the other children that are buried there, but there's no other names on it. And just a few yards away, there's another unmarked grave. And there's the credit for the work for this was Home Children's Canada with Lori as well. 17 infants of Bernardo girls and 58 Bernardo children are in 2 unmarked graves. So why did they remain silent? Most of the children faced ridicule, teasing. They were told they were worth nothing. They were told they were nobodies. They were street trash. So they were ashamed of who they were and their past. So they avoided speaking about it. Sometimes it was painful to talk about it. I said, I was 3 when my grandfather died, and I have 3 memories of him, but I can pick him out in a picture. I was able to sit on his lap when he told the Bible stories to all of his grandchildren after dinner on Sundays because I was the baby. He never left the table till all of the food was gone, and he always had a fork with him. The other two is because he never knew when his next meal was coming, and he always had to be ready to eat that meal. There are unique stories. Like I said, some were good, some were horrible. My grandfather's was okay because I'm here to tell it. So it's not a great thing to find, but it's part of history, and I think it needs to be told. I think the children need to be recognized for what has gone on. So before I finish off, as you can tell in all my slides and as what I'm wearing, is the sunflower. The children, the descendants of the children have adopted the sunflower because sunflowers are resilient. Once they grow, they have that big, huge stem and nothing can blow them over. And these children had to be resilient to be able to do and live through what they've lived through. How many of you know about your home child descendant, and how can I help you? So I just want to say a few thank yous. I want to thank the museum for having me here, for the Niagara branch for hosting the Zoom call. I also want to thank my friend Jan Salisbury from Wellington, who helped me with the slides, and also to Home Child Canada, who helped me with the slides and the presentation and everything that they do as well. And now I'll take questions. So the question was that I mentioned Scotland and England, and were the people from Ireland as well. There were a few, but most of them were taken to England and shipped out of England. So, next question.
As you were talking, it seemed that the majority of these children, they were either from overpopulation, poverty, and so on. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, most of them were all from poverty. Yeah, they were from lower income families.
Higher echelon children that came into this program for whatever.
I have never, in my personal research, ever found any child that had both parents. I can't say both parents because some of them did have both parents, but no, not from a higher pay, like a richer family. Any other questions?
I have a question. So you said that your grandfather was, so is this something that you found and brought to your family, or was he, because you indicated that his story wasn't as traumatic, although pretty traumatic still, did he share it with his children, and that's how you know?
No, so my grandfather never talked about it. I always remember a chest being at the end of his bed, and we were always told we weren't allowed to touch it. Where it is right now, I don't know. I think my aunt might have it, but she's not saying anything. But anyways, I have asked. And so no, between the research Steve did and myself and other things, we were the ones that were able to tell his story. Like I said, my grandfather never spoke about it. He never spoke about his family other than the brother that he had here. What we know about my grandfather is from my research.
Wow.
And the thing about doing this research is my great grandmother's married name and her maiden name were the same. So when you research in England and you research Biggs, which is the last name, Biggs, it's like Smith or Wilson here. It's huge. With the research, we were lucky enough that one of the siblings in Australia, their family was looking for the same family. They had my great grandmother's whole side filled in, except this hole. And they sent me this great big huge pedigree and everything. And I was able to fill the hole in, which was the two brothers that were sent to Canada for them. But everything stops at great grandpa. We have nothing of him. So we're still looking for his family and stuff like that. Now, luckily enough, my aunt, whose dad was my grandfather's brother, but the one that my grandparents adopted, she wrote to Bernardo's and got his file because I wasn't able to get the file. So if you write to Bernardo's and say, I have a home child, they're going to write back to you and say, are you the oldest living relative in your family? Because they will not give the file to you if you're not the oldest living relative. So then, like I did, I went to my mom, took the exact same letter, had her sign it, and they sent me the file. it came to my address. It was just with my mom's name on it. So just realize that they may ask that you're being the oldest asking for it. But I had also asked for my uncle's file, and they said, we cannot give you that information because somebody else has asked for it. So in other words, there was one of his children or grandchildren asked for it. So of course I got on the phone right away and asked my aunt, did you ask for your dad's file? She goes, wasn't me. She asked all of her siblings that she knew. It was none of them. She has one sibling that was adopted, and we're wondering if it was her that asked for the file, but I wasn't able to get his file, but my aunt was. So and she's got handwritten letters from her dad looking for my grandfather. So we've been able to take the two files and combine them and get a pretty good history of the both of them.
First of all, I want to thank you so much for your presentation. It was excellent. I'm a descendant. My grandmother and her brother were both home children through Bernardo. She went through Hazel Break, and they lived as brother and sister until 95 and 96 respectively. So I have a lot of wonderful memories. And I just want to say one of the things that I have been researching and trying to find a way to get this part of our Canadian history. We know about it. There's a reluctance on the part, it seems, of a lot of educational institutions and so on to really bring it forth. And I think it's incumbent on all of us who are descendants who know more about it to find ways to lobby for this, because it's not about compensation. It's not about anything other than accepting the fact that these children did so much, especially in our farms and our other parts of Canada, to really give us what we have today, and very difficult circumstances, which my grandmother had. And so I'm just so grateful that they came through that, and I'm grateful for what they did. And I think as a Canadian, it's important that other people are at least aware of this part of our history, because they had great challenges to face.
Yeah.
And I was there when the book Real Immigrants came out.
Mm-hmm.
It was book one. I was there with my great uncle, and I got to talk with a lot of people who were still alive at that time, and it was pretty humbling. Their stories from
Yeah.
this experience that who had shut it down on telling about it because of the memories it brought to them. And that was a very humbling experience for me as a Canadian to hear their stories. So thank you.
You're welcome. So back in 2010, there was a stamp made for Home Child Day, Canadian government a stamp. They've given us September 28th as Home Child Day, but they don't make any big thing out of it. We do have our beacons of light, which Home Child Canada has started to try to bring recognition. The only country that has not apologized for this thing is Canada. Australia has apologized. The England has apologized. Canada is the only one that hasn't apologized for this part, their part in it. To me, I don't need an apology. My grandfather needed the apology. But for me to be able to stand here and tell you guys and help educate you guys and hopefully help you guys find your home child is why I'm here and why I do what I do. This also, Bernardo's gave out good conduct medals. So sometimes you'll see a good conduct medal. If you're doing your research, you find a good conduct medal. I have one here. It was basically if they behaved themselves, they got a medal. This one here is from a William Gaynor. We're also trying to find his family so I can give the medal back to him or to their family, because I don't want to keep them if the family wants it. I also have the honor of sharing my birthday with what as we know right now, the last living Bernardo boy in Canada. He lives in Guelph. He just turned 101 on September 14th. And he's also a vet. He's actually out doing home children stuff today with his caregiver and friends, recognizing Home Children's Day today, and his name is George. Lori, who I mention a lot, is very good friends with him and does a lot with George and the Home Child Canada. He did a fundraiser, a silent auction and fundraiser for Home Child Canada to be able to get more records and more stuff and to build a museum. We are looking to hopefully build a museum for home children. So, yes.
This was a few years ago, but in newsletters, and I think it started on Facebook, the Home Children version. And I sent away for this, but this is the split in the middle with the red line, and on one side you see the unit back,
And on the other side, you see the profile of a child looking towards Canada. We have the Canadian flag on the other side, and its back is to the child. I just find that really touching.
Yeah.
Bernardo, it's called Bernardo's poem, The Waves and Waves.
Yeah. Yeah. So for the people online, the lady's talking about a pin she has that is a home child's pin. It's got a Union Jack with the face of a child looking at Canada with his back to the Union Jack. And her grandmother was a home child. But it's okay because you're here to talk about it. It is heartbreaking because there are some people that don't have descendants because when they got here, like we have stories and there's stories in the books and there's stories in the newspaper where their receiving home killed them. They put them in the barn and that's where they lived in a Canadian winter. So it is, like I said, there are sad stories, but then there are stories where they were adopted and they were treated as part of the family. My grandfather went to Toronto, came to Toronto at 7 years old. He went to Huntsville and lived on a farm with two 97-year-old people when he was 7. So who ran the farm? Then from Huntsville, what we can decipher is he went from Huntsville to Stayner. Then we lose him for a while, and then he's in Niagara. And this is where he finished off his life, was in Niagara. So, yes, sir.
How were you able to find him in Huntsville?
In his records, it told us that he was in Huntsville first, and then doing some research, we found him in Stayner, and then I was raised in Niagara. This is where he married my grandmother, and so that's how we know he was in Niagara.
Just to share a little bit on the genealogy side of that, beyond the records that Diana shared, which are hugely valuable, like they're very, very valuable. There's a ton of other records like there. Like we've been to Huntsville searching schools, and in Huntsville, we've been, we've gone boots on the ground to local museums where they have very specific records to track these kids because they're not old enough to get caught in census. So you've got to go down to school records and yearbooks, and that's what makes local museums like the Welland Museum so important, is they have those records in place. So if you are going to try to track them, go boots on the ground.
Steve just said you got to go to the boots on the ground, the local historical societies, museums for sure. I know they have records because I've seen them. Historical societies, anybody that's in the area. It was funny because when we were in Huntsville, we stayed in just outside of Algonquin Park in a little resort that was on the lake. It was beautiful. We were there for Thanksgiving weekend. We were with our kids. Talked to the lady, and it turned out that her family was the family my grandfather was placed with. So she calls her aunt, asks her aunt if she's got any family photos with any pictures and anything. Unfortunately, we had to leave before she got a response back. But it was just that connection. It was very odd that I grew up camping in Huntsville my whole life, not knowing that that's where my grandfather was first placed. My husband and I now are involved in a campground in Stayner. What's the chances of me going back to Stayner where my grandfather? Like, it's just very weird how that whole circle is coming around just from the research and stuff like that. Yes, ma'am.
My father was burned up. And so I got to ask the question, and I met his family.
Fabulous. Fabulous. It's great when you can do that. Yeah, it's just the way it happens. Unfortunately, it's a flip of the coin. So there are magazines, and I know Home Child Canada has them on, they're called the Ups and Downs magazines. So Bernardo's tracked the kids when they got married. They were listed in there. I used to have one. I'm not sure where it is. It must be in a box somewhere. And I showed it to a lady and she goes, "That's my grandmother." And it had announced her grandmother's marriage on the back of it. So I let her take a picture of it, of course. And so if you go on to the registry, or if you go on Home Child Canada's website and you scroll down and look for the Ups and Downs magazines, they also have all of the copies that they have there for those, but there's not a lot out there because they were magazines. So they just got, like all of our magazines, they get tossed in the garbage after so long, but we have been able to get a good part of the collection of them. Yes, ma'am.
Say too, at the local level here, you have descendants, or you think in the area, the Niagara Museum, they've had a volunteer there working, and they've tracked over 5,000 of the children that came through Maria Rice home in Niagara on the Lake, and they've been able to follow them because they get so many requests from people who are descendants. And then last year at Port Colborne Museum, they had a local display that was done in the area that worked on farms. So I think that within the library, there's more and more research being done to help people who are trying to find their family members of their history.
So one of the ladies that was in the audience today came in and gave me this book. It's called Home Children. And in it, she found Robert Bishop in Fenwick, Percy Mitchell from Port Colborne, L. Berrigan from Niagara on the Lake, Thomas Hilton in Welland, and Robert McDonald in Dunville. Have any of those names, or you have one of your descendants is one of those names? Please let me know. I can let you see them in the book. She was nice enough to put the page numbers and everything down for the kids that are in this book. So that's a valued information for us. And that's my talk. So I hope you enjoyed it.
I just want to thank the Welland Museum for hosting us today. We partnered with many of our heritage museum sites and other organizations in the region, and we're proud that we can support each other. If you've been to our website, heritageniagara.ca, you'll see we have many of the events hosted around the region at these heritage sites that you can go and visit. We had a lot over this summer. There's a whole bunch of haunted type tours coming for October, so you should pop over there and have a look. I also wanted to point out our upcoming educationals. Friday, October 18th, we're going to have the Grimsby Historical Society. October 19th, we're going to be back at the Welland Library Seaway Mall to help you find your ancestors. Come in and join us. We'll do a hands-on type presentation and help you look for whoever you're looking for. You can ask us questions. November 15th, we're going to have the Great War and the White Plague with Eric Story from Brock University. November 16th, we're going to be back at the Welland Library, but at the main branch this time. Again, you can ask us whatever questions you want. We've got more coming for 2025, and I want to thank you, as always, for joining us, whether you're in the audience or online. Please go to our website, niagara.ogs.on.ca, and sign up for our newsletter. We send out newsletters with all of our upcoming events, as well as things that are going on at the local museums and heritage sites. And I think that's about all I had to say, and I'm going to pass the microphone over. Thank you again, and thank you, Dianna, as well.
So thank you. Thank you so much, Dianna, for the excellent talk. I'm sure we all learned something, and I do think that this is something that we have for too long ignored in Canadian history. It's not, I know in our advertisement for this event, we got a lot of feedback, oh, I never knew this before. So it is something that we need to start sharing more frequently. So thank you so much, and thank you to the Genealogical Society for presenting with us today. Just a few things. October 19th, we have another presentation here regarding the murals of Welland. On the 22nd, we're doing a paint night, and it's paint an artifact. Now, we're not giving you an artifact to paint. We're going to have an artifact, and we're going to walk you through painting that. And then in November, so many of you may know that the Niagara region, one of the most famous things here is the Welland Canal. The Welland Canal will be 200 years old this year. The museums along the canal, that's St. Catharines, Port Colborne, Welland, and Thorold, are all hosting a Saturday. Each Saturday in November, we're hosting a lecture series about the canal. On the 9th, it'll be in Port Colborne. On the 16th, it's here. The 23rd, it's in Thorold. And the 30th, it is in St. Catharines. So those are our upcoming events. So thank you again. Thank you.